morning. You guys can sit next to each other there. Yes, that's fine. Pick which of those seats you like better there. Good morning. How'd you sleep?
Amazing. So beautiful.
Right?
Yeah. That spot is fucking perfect.
It is.
It's so cozy and comfortable. Like sounds of nature or like my lullabies, you know? I always spill this stuff, but no, it's minor. That's what I did out there. Thank you.
In the lower seat of the two, I think.
They're adjustable.
No, that one is not really adjustable. It won't stay up.
Oh.
There's something wrong with it.
You're so good. How are you so good at piano? It's beautiful.
It's all I do all day long. I do this podcast and I play the piano.
Goodbye. See my mug? We had a whole episode about this mug. It says Brittany. Yeah, Brittany.
Okay, so you guys are gonna have to share that microphone.
It's not the same photo, is it? It's different.
Yeah, it's the same photo.
It is.
Same
Oh.
photo,
Yeah. It's on a different medium. The other one's printed on metal, and this one's printed on watercolor paper.
Huh.
Can you guys get up close to the microphone? Scoot your chair up to it so that you're like, as much as possible, making out with the mic.
Nah.
Let me hear you.
Testing,
Talk.
testing.
Yeah.
Hello,
Wait,
hello,
but,
hello.
Amazing.
Oh, but how?
Yeah. Oh, but how? Okay, let's see. I can make that
That's
like
as much
even
as I
louder.
got.
How's that? Hold on. Okay, I'm gonna
we're
turn down the piano.
we're totally sharing the coronavirus here.
But
That's okay.
well,
It's okay. I think we are.
you're already corona connected, probably just by virtue of being in the hot tub yesterday. Okay, I'm gonna stop recording and start again.
For liability
That was
reasons.
all. I recorded all of that. It was kind of fun. I think it was a good intro, but we'll stop it just in case.
You do that thing that, doc filmmakers do where they sometimes...
I leave the camera rolling.
Yeah, you leave the
Yeah.
camera
open
rolling.
mic.
Yeah, no tricks. He knows all the tricks.
Yeah, in fact, I'm going to keep recording. I can always start it a little later if I need to.
And is the
But-
mic sensitive for both sides, or this side or that side?
It's most sensitive on the side that's facing Patrick right now.
Okay,
Yeah, that's the best.
there you go.
We haven't worked out with all this technology, I still don't have it worked out for the third person yet, both in terms of,
Fine, though, right? I mean...
tell us, dear listener, has it been fine? Or are you still struggling with audio levels being lower and higher, please? We're working on it. Chris Ryan told me that I should use a compressor after we record. Like you can put on an equalizer, basically a volume.
Yeah.
I think that's coming up for us. We're getting there.
When
Good
we get
morning.
our first grant.
Yes. Patrick, now you're far away from the mic, though. I think you need to talk more into it as well.
I'm fine.
Okay, fine.
People know what they need.
We have a
They
guest
wanna- they
today.
wanna
That's
listen to me,
exciting
they can
thing.
Turn it up.
Having a guest is what we want more often. Everybody loves guests, including us. But we're being out here in the middle of nowhere. For those of you who don't know, we're like 2 miles up a dirt road in the middle of Joshua Tree. And we do have a frequent, given where we are, there's a frequent number of interesting people who somehow show up. And you most of all, Lucy. Hi.
Hi. Thank you.
Fellow documentary filmmaker. We met in Venice several years ago. And then now we have this coincidental friend in common.
How'd you guys meet? In just random LA social scene?
Lucy, do you remember?
Who brought you over to my house? It's a good question.
I don't remember.
But it was a fun night. There were several people at my house, and you were one of them. But we also had many other friends in common.
Yeah. And there was the topic of your new film involved, I think, too.
Psychedelics, yes. Yeah. Yes, that's right. Always thinking about and researching psychedelics. That's right. That's
why don't
me.
we start now and go backwards? Or do you want to start at the beginning and tell us how you became a documentary filmmaker? Or do you want to start right away with what you're doing right now, this second? Like, how did you end up here? And where are we?
I love you driving here. It's great. You're directing. I'm just, I'm your subject here, which is a fun change.
I need help. I usually wake up very alert, but last night I went to bed at like 8 o'clock. And so I woke up at like 1 a.m., which is too early. And then I like kind of pottered about for a few hours. And then I fell back asleep and woke up kind of dazed as if it was the middle of the night. So forgive me.
There's an argument that people used to do that the 2 sleeps is the way to go. What does Patrick, the neuroscience, say about that?
People think I know like cultural history just because I know some things about like the molecular biology of a neuron. I have no idea.
No.
I'm always curious about the 2 sleeps theory.
Me too. I do like it. I like it. We've talked about it once before, actually. That middle of the night time, in the time before cell phones, was very special. It was supposed to be a time for intimacy, for meditation, for, a moment that you're away from the hustle and bustle of the world. And so it actually does make sense that we would have this little kind of hour in the middle of the night. But now it's just spent like doom scrolling Twitter. So it's not so valuable anymore.
And how glorious must it have been to be able to like actually go outside and look up and there's like a rating scale now about the level of light pollution in the world. And if you look, I think it's the definition, the unit that they use to define the amount of light and pollution is what did the sky look like 400 years ago? And that's 1, right? And then it goes up like Manhattan is, just above Manhattan or Tokyo is an 8 or a 9. And you can find there's only a tiny few spots in all of North America that are still 1s.
Is Death Valley one of them?
I wonder. I don't know. There's a map online. I think I want to call it the Dunbar, but it's probably not the Dunbar. But like, how lovely would it have been to be like in the halfway through that middle sleep when you wake up in that kind of intermission to look up and be at the 1, right? You're always there 400 years ago because that's when you live.
Well, I think everything showed up as more wondrous. I think that it's not a coincidence. It's not just because we know so much. Because I think in hundreds of years we'll look back and think that we still knew nothing about the universe. But there's something about the way we behold nature, which was, I imagine, more in a state of reverence and awe. And I felt it sometimes when I go to Iceland or even like in Montana or something. And you can put yourself in the place of believing in gods or in spirits and stuff like that. So I think this ties into also what you're researching a bit.
Yeah, like connectedness with nature is a metric that shifts considerably when you take psychedelic medicine, psychedelic substances. But I feel that still, but I feel that the great tragedy of our life is that we're disconnected from nature, right? That we're deracinated, that everything in modern life contrives to mediate your relationship with nature and make you forget that actually you're happier when you are in that simpler, connected state. And when you're talking about light pollution, I was just thinking that you're out here in the desert and you have the difference between the full moon and the no moon and the moonrise and the stars, and you're so the light pollution drowns all that out, and it's so interfering of your circadian rhythm and your everything in your body, and we're just so disconnected from that. And
also get a false sense of control. I think when you look around and see man-made things, they're easier to understand and control. Whereas I am lucky here that even though we're only 2 hours from LA, I can go on a short walk and be surrounded by nothing man-made, and therefore be in a state of like less understanding and less control. And I think that's to kind of abandon that control puts you in a different posture towards yourself and towards the world, I think.
And do you think with just like a bleary glimpse of the sky or the light outside, you can tell what time of day it is? Like, so it's, I guess, to your point that you have just more, you're sampling more data about the actual like change over the course of the day, right? With the light here, and you're actually getting an accurate reflection. So I actually have, so this is interesting. I have, well, you guys can determine if it is. So I had trouble sleeping for years, just for years and years. And so I used to have these little white noise machines, and the white noise machine that I have has a bird setting, like a forest setting. And someone commented after I moved here, their comment was like, you need to turn that off, like right now. And I was very confused, because to me it was just background noise that like helped me sleep, and was just kind of like existed in the uniform like digital nature, soundscape. And her reasoning, which I think is extremely sound, is they're chirping at the wrong time. Like, this is not the time of day that birds are supposed to be chirping. It's unnatural. And I had never thought about the unnaturalness of my digital birds chirping in the background to help me go to sleep. And I think that's a really interesting point, that you can use a lot of these sensory cues to actually tell time, and you're noticing. The brain is noticing, right? And so that like the more you kind of artificially introduce all the kinds of sounds and sights and light, etc., you're gonna be disconnected from the kind of like rhythms. So I bet you could. You've been out here 4 years or something. I bet you could, with just a small glimpse, tell exactly what time of day it is.
Yeah. And if you think about the stars, like the relationship of like the ancient Phoenician navigators, what rapport they had when they looked at the stars, it told them where they are, right? And it told them where to go. Whereas we have none of that now. We just look up and we might have an aesthetic experience, right? Oh, they're so pretty now that there's no light pollution. But it's still an impoverished kind of relationship, I think, that we have because of technology. Now we just look at our GPS to tell us where to go.
We were talking last night with a chef who had said that the Japanese like dietary requirement, the guideline for their food pyramid was like just eat 20 different plants a day. Do you feel like that's a way to get back, like racinate?
I love that. Well, I always eat a lot of vegetable variety, so I seem to have intuited. I feel like in some level I have a Japanese sympathy or something. I feel like Japanese culture, when I went there, I had a recognition with, for example, their cherry blossom obsession, which I hadn't read about, and I had personally developed my own as a teenager. And then I went to Japan, age 22, and was surprised to find that this whole culture venerated cherry blossom moment. And I think there's a lot about Japanese culture that I happen to resonate with. And I think that the variety of vegetables approach is actually how I eat. So.
And then can you tell the story about that dinner that you had that was about the now or the present or the moment?
It's a long anecdote, though, and it's a beautiful anecdote about an amazing Japanese meal with a 7th generation tempura master and his wife in this incredible, gorgeous tatami mat wooden house restaurant in Tokyo that my first love took me to lunch at. And it was just an exquisite meal. And all the ingredients you couldn't translate because they were so seasonal. There would be a special fern that only grew that week, and nobody could, these were words you couldn't translate because they were so ephemeral and specific. And at the time, not eating fish, I was trying to struggle to establish my vegetarian diet on these people, and it was just the wrong framework, and we couldn't even figure out translation, even though we had 2 perfectly bilingual people there, because the foodstuffs were so specific, and it was so beautiful. And I sort of abandoned my vegetarian principles for once in my life, and it was a stunning experience, although I didn't sleep for a couple of weeks afterwards because I was so unused to eating the stuff. It was really strange, but it was a beautiful experience. Now, Japanese culture has a lot to teach us, and I think that their I've had some fantastic. Have you ever? I don't know. Can you either of you relate? I've had goosebumpy moments in Japanese gardens and the spirits and the Shinto. I've been filming in. I've filmed a bit in Japan, not just about cherry blossoms, which I made a film about, but another film about fermentation, which happened to be a commercial for Kikkoman, but actually I actually like to think it played on some cooking channel and people really enjoyed it, and it won some film festivals that I didn't even submit it to, which surprised me because it was a 30-minute long Kikkoman commercial. But it was we really poured a lot of love into it, and it was actually really an earnest inquiry into the nature of fermentation and Japanese culture and learning about fermentation. It was actually fascinating, and one of those pieces of branded content that actually completely transcends its brief, and didn't mention Kikkoman at all. But filming in these temples, sort of you'd notice that the wind would ruffle just so, and the butterflies would show up, and there was just this incredible kind of life in the garden that really, you felt the spirits, the sort of Shinto spirits. You felt that with all the Japanese focus on nature and the spirits of the place and the animism, somehow I felt that. And that's a advanced, extremely packed, crammed, over-constructed society, right? It's this very packed island full of artifice and construction, and yet that culture retains that really beautiful, I think, relationship with nature. So I find that inspiring.
Well, I often think about the fact that we have these two biological imperatives, like for food and sex, and we're very lucky as a species that they are not only pleasurable where they could be very much the opposite. I mean, if you think of other species where, like, the one of the sexes is killed, or it's like violent, or it's the spikes on the penis of the cat, or think about how boring it could be that, like, like an animal that only eats one thing, or where eating involves a lot of violence and uncertainty. We have this, so we have not only an intrinsic pleasure with these biological imperatives, but then we have this added beauty, which is that their domain's rich for meaning, right? And we've created these like rituals around both that allow it to be a place where we discover not just the meaning of the imperative, which is that we need to survive to eat, or we need to like procreate, but there's like these layers, and those layers are real. I think they're places where actual significance happens.
I see it a little differently, though. I see humans as meaning-making machines. I mean, sort of all the creatures, we're the creatures obsessed with complex symbolic activity who will kill for an idea. No other animal is gonna commit an act of terrorism or so forth, and so we'll find the meaning and the poetry and build and innovate and create around everything that we do. And of course, because food and sex are important to us, there's going to be a tremendous amount of meaning that we're going to want to make around that.
I'd posit that you're a victim of this contemporary phenomenon of thinking that it all comes from us, whereas just like I said, if everything's man-made around you, that you think man has control over everything. So you might think that it's us making the meaning because you're used to a world where we create things. But I think if we lived in a state of wonder and openness to nature, we would maybe find the meaning is out there.
I think the meaning is out there, but we know the meaning is out there. But I think our default mode network is, if it's that, because we have a neuroscientist here, and I think the jury's out. But the idea I'm sort of interested in, or maybe it's default mode network, counterfactual thinking that is so much bigger in us compared to other apes, right, or other mammals behind that. We have specialized parts of our brain, and we obviously behave differently than other mammals, and that really you can think of as really the meaning-making parts, that we're really obsessed with innovating and ideas, and I did this, I did that, I want to do this, I want to do that, what about this, what about that? We're constantly so creative, and I think that has blinded us, yes, perhaps, in many ways. In our culture, we've become so blind, and we think that we're the only thing that is meaning or agency, or we create our gods and totally don't see the trees and understand the nature of reality at all.
I agree that we are meaning. That we are the creatures that for whom meaning even exists, right? I don't know if there's meaning, a more or less meaningful life for a dog, and yet I'd like to accept that. We're next to a military base here, but this has never happened before.
Probably new fire.
Are there
Or
new
the
fire?
show of strength from the president. That sounds like an osprey, no? I mean, that's a serious machine in the air there.
Yeah, it is. It's the wrong time of day,
Yeah.
I think, for that to be chirping.
But anyway, I'm wondering if there's a way of accepting that meaning only exists for humans, and yet not believe that it's us making the meaning. So it seems like the meaning emerges in the world if we think about it the right way.
As if there's a category that only we kind of see or perceive.
Exactly.
Right. So it's not us making it, it's just us being exclusive perceivers of the thing.
Yeah.
So I think this is definitely true in mice, and then I think generalizes also to primates that you're saying the two biological imperatives, food and sex, right? Mm-hmm. But if you look at the actual wiring of the olfactory kind of neurons and bulb, and like the sensory input from smell, the question being which of the stimuli directly cause reflexive behavior. So basically skip all processing and go straight to behavioral output. And there's only two, and you got one right, and one of them is not food though. So that's the clue to which one is right. It's defensive behaviors. So it's defense and sex. It's fear and sex, not food and sex. So food gets at least processed for a few milliseconds. Food can be have a valence and can have a kind of approach avoidance. Do I want it now? Do I not? It can be regulated. But fear and sex are things that are completely unregulated. They just go straight to innate output. They skip the brain's entirety of all of the cognition and just go straight to we know what to do. We approach or we avoid. We run away or we run towards. And so there seems to be, to me then, categories of things, categories of inputs, categories of stimuli that are outside of meaning. They happen too quickly for meaning to kind of intrude. And I wonder the degree to which we either have co-opted or made artificial certain kinds of meaning. But it, I don't know. I'm more on Lucy's side that I think we're 100% the meaning makers.
Yeah.
I think that nothing out there, we know nothing out there. We know nothing about what's out there except the version of how we think we should behave according to it. And that's just it.
I want to talk more about Lucy. Where do you come from? How did you get into documentary filmmaking? Tell us a bit about yourself, please.
There's no quick answer. I think there's different ways to perhaps answer it, though, and maybe a more interesting one than the autobiography is to think, why am I interested? What part of me was meaning making around it? Why that of all things? Because I am someone that's profoundly and problematically interested in absolutely everything. It's really tough to bore me and find something that I'm not just fantastically curious and excited about and could devote a lifetime to tinkering with and mastering and playing with and making meaning around. And I think that for me, the opportunity of my lifetime was that there are some technologies that came up that really opened up a new way of us looking at life and understanding our lifetimes and the world around us. The opportunity to use non-linear editing. So these avids and now all kinds of other software. But the revolution in sort of my lifetime was non-linear editing, so that you didn't have to like chop little pieces of cellophane with the guillotine and tape them back together. And if you wanted to find one frame, I mean, it's just this incredibly laborious job involving a mountain. I mean, millions of feet, miles literally of stinky, dusty, allergenic, painful when you cut yourself with it. Imagine like paper cuts.
Yeah.
It was so hard. That stuff to manipulate the the images to make a story in that medium used to be so hard with the editing. And then in Lifetime, suddenly you had this like fantastic, revolution where you could just compare alternate cuts and make, different stories out of the material. So you could shoot a whole bunch of crap and sort it out later, which when you're trying to sort of document the mud of real life and shine up some actual story that's watchable back, that whole post-production process and making real life interesting, I think was it what's his name, who said that the film was life with the boring parts cut out. Goddard, I think, said that. But like life, when you're actually dealing with documentary and you're actually, the movie is life, you've really got to do a lot of cutting. So I think that was a revolution. And then also these affordable cameras. So you didn't need to have a script. You could just shoot a bunch of stuff and figure it out. And also grab the means of production. You didn't need to, as a girl, it's so tough to raise money, and I never had the kind of confidence of the money fundraising part of it, but you can kind of start somewhere and build from there. Also really suited me. And the profound sort of observational quality of it, which I find really interesting, rather than talking about control, rather than sort of inflicting script and my sort of, which I kind of like screenwriting too. That's fun, and you can actually make things exciting happen when you have a script. But the idea of actually letting life happen and just observing so closely that you notice the narratives unfolding of actual life is, for me, ultimately more compelling, and makes me look at scripts and TV and film now as kind of a bunch of people like in silly costumes and sets I just look at the kind of budget line items of, and sort of make believing, according to some screenwriters, often kind of limited idea of stories that I don't really want to know about. So
it's kind of like exactly what we're talking about. You're looking for meaning in the world and they're trying to create it from scratch. Like I was very influenced by Dziga Vertov and the kind of Russians in the 1920s. They were saying, Eisenstein and all these guys were saying that most filmmaking, the way it was, particularly as it was being done by Americans, was borrowing from other art forms. It was just like copying literature or theater, and therefore it wasn't getting to the essence of what the art was. And the art really was in finding real life imagery, and then editing. Editing was the one thing that exists only in film, and that we shouldn't be like using editing in this limited way to just tell a linear story either. And I remember hearing that Dziga Vertov had a train that he would go around Russia and just like being catching life, and then creating these masterpieces that made like MTV music videos from 70 years later seem kind of amateurish by comparison in terms of how much experimentation they did and how fast their cutting was and everything like this. And actually I think the editing they were doing is just as non-linear as we got to the computer. It was linear when we went to video, and then we went back in a way to the non-linearity of film when the digital systems came out. And I was equally excited about the same time as I imagine you were getting started. And I ended up buying a school bus inspired by Dziga Vertov, and we put like 3 digital video editing systems inside this bus. And then there was a quote of Jean Cocteau that we wrote on the side of the bus that was, film will only become art when its materials are as inexpensive as pencil and paper.
Exactly. Oh, so we're the same school. That's right. And I loved Ziga Vertov, and used to go to Anthology Film Archives when I was living in New York, going to NYU Graduate Film School, and watch all his films and read Eisenstein and the editing of the Potemkin steps or the Odessa steps, right?
Yeah.
And all this stuff. Yeah, absolutely. That was my inspiration. And those city symphonies is a genre which I love. And
Berlin Symphony of a City, and also there was one,
exactly.
The Man with the Movie Camera.
The Man with the Movie Camera was growing up in London. There was a museum called the Museum of the Moving Image, which I was obsessed with and used to go the whole time. And they had a recreation actually of that train, and all kinds of fun stuff in there. And somehow I was the only person that loved it, and they got rid of it. And afterwards, I always bugged the people because it was part of the British Film Theatre, National Film Theatre, kind of British Film Institute kind of government film sort of treasure and funding body. And they all said, oh, no one ever went. And I thought, my God, if I went so much. It's true that I was sort of the only person in there when I used to go, but really there was no one else interested. I thought it was just a tremendous place for all the reasons that you've mentioned. So I think that's a more interesting, way to think about why I'm a documentary filmmaker, because I think it's the most interesting kind of unfolding edge of culture in my lifetime. And I wonder now if that's changing and whether I still want to do it or whether I'm just still committed to the same path, because the world keeps unfolding, and maybe there are more interesting edges of culture to be pushing and exploring. But for me, the sort of properties and when you can telescope time, for example, growing up, a film that really inspired me was Hoop Dreams, because you could see life compressed. You could kind of glimpse the way that fate and life and moments acted. You could see the kind of forces that shaped life when you telescope years of someone's life and compress them. And then it's sort of a microscope or a telescope, but for human lives, documentary filmmaking. It's an instrument to really peer into, in a new way, understand our lives in a new way. And so for me, it's been a way of exploring the world around me. And
I also think it's a bit like French cooking, editing, because you put all these ingredients in the pot, and then you have to just keep boiling it, and it just keeps getting smaller and smaller until you get to this like really flavorful essence, which might be like a tiny percentage of what you've put into it.
And so what about, you made a VR film, right? Or 360 film?
I made a few VR films, yeah.
So then how does that relate to the like slice of life that you're capturing in terms of telescoping and editing and this nonlinear editing? Because you lose a bit of control when you're giving like an experiential option to the viewer about where to look, right?
People talk about that. I think people overestimate that. I think people think that you don't direct VR because people have the agency to look around in a headset, and they can look behind them and see the bunny rabbit, or they can look in front of them and see the Joshua tree. But actually, if you are watching a movie, you can sort of tune into the dialogue, or you can tune into the color of the dress. Or I think people are always, oh wait, you're nodding. You've had this argument before, I can tell.
I disagree with
you. Okay.
I also agree.
Yeah.
Okay, good, yeah.
So you're saying it's a matter of degree, not kind.
Yeah.
That the viewer has always had attentional control.
Yeah.
Always, yeah.
So, but it doesn't.
It's just a larger canvas.
But where in the non-linearity does that matter? Where in the telescoping of time does it matter? Because I feel like that kind of thing in particular is much more present focused.
Well, it's a different instrument, right? It's a different medium. So for me, the kinds of VR experiences I've done have been live action. So you've sort of had a 360 camera. I did a few, for a minute there, I was directing VR a lot. I think I directed perhaps more VR. At one point it was claimed that I directed more VR pieces than anyone. I think that lasted about 5 minutes. But for a while there, I was shooting with it a lot and really excited about it. And for me, I'd actually started out in theater and so I had a kind of that live, and done a lot of theater in the round and really enjoyed that kind of, I did lots of fun musicals outdoors growing up in the UK and at college, and it was really fun way of directing fun, incredible, talented, amazing people doing just awesome, fun stuff in summer gardens, beautiful evenings in England growing up. It was really a divine way to play around with your friends growing up, was making these experiences. But that kind of theatre in the round and live thing was very intuitive for me, and didn't, so it's a whole different medium when you're actually editing less, typically in VR. And so you're sort of staging more in the moment. You're kind of directing and staging and rehearsing like live theatre, and then you kind of, hide under a tree and say action, and this stuff unfolds. And you typically don't edit, because edits are so jarring in VR. So it's a whole different medium, essentially. And the confusing thing is that the sort of screen resolution quality, the video kind of technology is similar, but actually it's a completely different kind of experiential medium in some ways, right?
So if you imagine just like a white picket fence, and you say like a mouse is approaching the fence versus a tractor is approaching the fence, and now imagine the distance from the fence to the mouse and the distance from the fence to the tractor. Even though the sentence is exactly the same, you're going to have, you imagine the mouse is closer, right? Mm-hmm. I bet you probably both did. Everyone does. So language has its own kind of spatial inferences in it, right? Like it was the same sentence structure, but because of the objects in it.
Wait, say that again. I missed it.
So imagine a mouse approaching a white picket fence.
Yeah.
And just visualize it. And now imagine a tractor approaching a white picket fence. The tractor is a bit farther.
Yeah.
That's how everyone imagines it, because there's spatial properties imbued within the objects themselves, right? So I was interviewing someone about elegance once, and I was asking them about the way that they imagined a ballerina, who they had used as the example of the most elegant form of kind of aesthetic movement. And the answer, which I find so beautiful, this guy was one of the designers at the New York Times, said that a ballerina is only elegant at the distance it is meant to be viewed. Too close, too far. If you zoom in on the pores of sweat, it's not elegant anymore. If you're too far away, you can't see it. You can't see the human shape. You're too far away. So there's a range in which the aesthetics happen. And one thing I've always wondered about film, and I've always wondered, I guess, both as photographers and filmmakers, you guys have to choose the distance at which events are viewed. Mm-hmm. Is that, like, how do you know the proper distance for an event?
Well, I think it's filmed at a bunch of different lengths, and then you figure that out in the editing
process.
You
do, yeah. And you also learn in film school that if you want to do a dramatic moment and you've chosen this wide shot because you thought the bridge in the background was really cool, then you get back to the editing room and you can't see the woman's face, you're going to be thinking, oh, I want to know what's going on with her. Or you might not. You might think this is the perfect moment to not know what's going on in the face and to enjoy instead, Antonioni style perhaps, focus on the landscape and let that be the emotional story. But you make these choices and you learn language. It's learning a language, right?
So I was being kind of prosecutorial there, where I actually had a follow-up question. That was my lead-in question, which is to say, then how do you deal with in VR just having a stationary camera and the events unfolding around a single object?
Well, you choose where you put the camera and you choose the people and stuff. You're staging everything, right? You have choices. You have different sets of choices because you can't, suddenly zip the camera from on top of the fence to underneath the fence unless you got some really special rigging going for you. But so you make all those calculations as you always do.
One of my favorite films of all time, I don't even remember what it was called, but it really stuck with me. They took the Lumiere brothers camera, the original. There's some controversy about whether the Lumiere brothers or Thomas Edison invented cinema. I think they invented it about the same time, separately. But so they decided, these French filmmakers, of course, who thought the Lumiere brothers were the inventors of cinema, they wanted to give that original camera to a bunch of contemporary filmmakers and see what they could do under the same constraints that the Lumiere brothers had. So they couldn't edit. They could only have 3 takes that were 1 minute long, and they had to hand crank the camera. And they gave it to David Lynch and Spike Lee and Eric Romer and all these amazing French and American filmmakers and some Greek and Italian. And I think it was 40 different filmmakers. And with the knowledge that we had today, I think David Lynch was the most creative. He built sets all around him in 360 degrees, and then he would turn the camera and then put a black thing in front of it, pan over, and then keep the scene going in the new place. So he was able to edit without editing, and I thought that was amazingly clever. And then they would ask each of the filmmakers, like, why do you make movies? And of course, 99% had really pretentious answers about the depth of like truth that they were looking for and all this stuff. And only Eric Romero, I think, gave the honest answer, which was, I just want people to love me. And so I now want to turn the question to you. I guess you've already answered it somewhat, but why do you make movies?
It's not for people to love me, although, you know, I don't complain if they do, but clearly. But no, it is. I have a real, you know, my meaning-making machine has always been in overdrive. I'm very curious, and I also need a job, so I do need, I am someone who needs to work for money. So I've got to do something to pay the rent. And I feel incredibly fortunate that I get to ask interesting people all the questions that I think are going to give the audience the most interesting experience. And I love just understanding something and then communicating it. And when you communicate it, you have to understand it. And that actually is a real challenge, you know, as someone like me who just really loves, I don't cut myself any slack at all in terms of the standards to which I hold myself kind of intellectually or kind of insightfully or something like that. So I want to really understand something or know that I don't and get somebody else in who does. But, and to communicate that and to really have this experience of awe and curiosity and what's really going on here. And I have this relationship with the world that I am just profoundly in awe of pretty much anything when you get into it. And to be able to discover that anew and understand some more things about the world. And
do you have a time that you think you did this most successfully? If somebody wanted to go out and seek your work out, is there one that you feel like came out the best?
It's obviously like, you know, choosing between your children, isn't it? I
think people could if they really wanted to, though. They
probably
do have a favorite
No,
child.
I can. A film that I really is, all my films sort of sound terrible, but the film that I love, there's a couple that are easy recommends of the feature length ones. My film The Crash Reel, which seems like a terrible premise, is a snowboarder who crashes. I mean, really, who would want to watch this film, especially if you're not into snowboarding? But it's not about that at all. It's really about life and how people are and what life does to you and how you respond. And so that's called The Crash Reel. And then there's another film called Wasteland, which has won a tremendous amount of awards and is very beautiful film because of the beautiful people in it. My first film I'm very fond of, Devil's Playground, about Amish young people. I'm still obsessed with the Amish. And I've made some short ones too that I'm very fond of. One about David Hockney that's very short, or one about called The Lion's Mouth Opens, about a young woman who's amazing called Mariana. And so all kinds of things. But back to the other thing about film that I love is that it's just all these medium, right? So it's music and it's photography and it's story and it's emotion and it's faces and it's light and it's architecture and it's just sounds and how we, you know, in playing with all these things, you understand how your brain puts the world together as well, and your sensory experience of being in the world. And so for me, that's also really, I like the 360 challenge of that, you know, communicating the experience of being alive. And so I think that's another reason why this is my medium. But I don't know, it does keep changing.
Your description of the why, though, could have, word for word, if you had been a scientist, it sounded like what scientists also might say.
Well, I could have been. I wish I was a scientist too. You see, yeah.
Well, about like unpacking
the
the world and giving it, you know, finding the meaning and extracting and understanding how the thing actually works. And I mean, I could not find a word that would not be descriptive also of a scientist.
Well, we're all just here trying to figure out what the fuck is going on. You know, like, why are we here and what is this? I think that if we're just tackling it from different angles, right? I definitely think the scientist and the documentary filmmaker are looking at the world and just trying to understand it.
So, but
just different layers of understanding and different ways and different mechanisms.
Like, to what degree do you think of editing and selection and choice as experimentation or selection? So, I mean, the only way that scientists perturb the world is by literally perturbing something. And do you think that, I mean, obviously, I'm sure there's like theory about this, but the degree to which the camera changes things, the degree to which your presence changes things. I mean, but do you actually see it as a kind of experimentation? Like, here, I have observed a event in nature. It could involve people, but it's effectively in nature in the outside world. And then I'm going to go and put it to camera. But that act is perturbation.
Perturbation, no. I've been thinking a lot about perturbation because I've been talking to a lot of the world's most fascinating and brilliant psychedelic researchers who are perturbing consciousness using psychedelics and learning about it. So I think I've been thinking a lot about this. And let me see if I can actually recall my thought that I just had, Patrick. No, I don't think that. I'm very aware of that the camera changes everything, the uncertainty principle. I'm not convinced even by the way that things sort of happen when they're not being observed in the universe. I'm not sure that they do. I think there's something about how reality gets built out that's really kind of Japanese just-in-time manufacturing. So that's me. But I think that by definition, as a documentary filmmaker, you are stories, narrative events, the kind that you want to make films about are perturbances, right? For something to be interesting dramatically, it's not a boring day in the patch of earth where the ants are maybe crawling by sometimes. You know, you're trying to find those moments where there's a story, there's something compelling, something's happening that is a perturbance of, that's what drama is, isn't it? And so we wouldn't get very far unless my snowboarder in the story had a, dramatic, life-changing accident and then various other things unfolded. It wouldn't be a very good story. No one would watch it. And I wouldn't be there challenged in all my craft to think how to tell the story, because there wouldn't be a story at all. And some people make films like that too, right? But they're rare experiments, because once you've watched the Empire State Building for a few minutes, you probably don't want to. Nobody's probably going to keep giving you money to make that on the big screen, right?
So, like, the 3-act structure of science and experimentation is you do experimental design, where you sit down and you kind of plan things out, and you look at your maybe statistical power or calculate it or something. Then you do the actual experiment, and then you have stage 3, which is analysis, right? I remember going to the Stanley Kubrick retrospective, and I saw his kind of timeline for Barry Lyndon and production of Barry Lyndon, the production calendar.
One of my favorite films.
And he had, like, preparatory stuff, and then principal photography, and then editing. You have post, right? And it just struck me like as so similar to the 3-act structure as of what science does. And it was difficult for me not to kind of map onto the three stages of science. And so the degree to which the storytelling happens in science is both in the experimental design phase, which is where you choose what question you're going to ask and what you want to disprove. And then the data collection, I imagine, is very similar to principal photography, where, like, you don't know what's going to happen. You can do your best to control as many variables as possible, but, like, there's individual variation in mice, there's individual variation in actors. Deal with it. But then in post, you do, and it's very similar to data analysis. You go back, and I guess one thing is I find, and if you ask most scientists, the deep platonic joy, like pure joy of science, is in that analysis phase, when you discover and you have a set of data that is unique, that is never before seen, that exists only in your hands, and that you get to kind of understand it and shape it. And do you guys feel?
I love that. Yeah, right? I totally feel that. In fact,
you feel in post a similar aesthetic?
I will always say, actually, and I for different reasons, but I always say that the kind of pleasure increases at every stage. The kind of stress to creativity ratio actually gets better and better throughout the process, and it's a little bit like sunset. It keeps getting better and better and better till it's all over. The kind of process of making a film and that editing phase for me is incredibly joyful and creative and amazing. And there's something that you're right about. It's not just the creative act of the editing that's very satisfying, and also often your life is a little bit easier because you just going to an editing room rather than climbing Mount Everest or worrying about money, which are the preceding, and worrying about what you might need. You're actually just putting it all together and seeing it. But there's also something you're right about. You're seeing results. It's not just the creative act. You're also getting to watch back, and it kind of culminates the last act. The last sort of act is often the sound mix, where you throw the film up on the big screen and in a fantastic sound studio, and you start putting all the sound effects and mixing all the music gorgeously and seamlessly and taking out all the like cruddy bits, and you just sort of see what you've done. And you see the signal and the noise kind of, you see the signal, right, which a good an experiment with some serious results gives you a signal that's, like you said, never before seen. And I even had a directing teacher that really influenced me tremendously. Was a wonderful, I think he's from Lithuania, former Soviet Union, probably Lithuania, director called Boris Fruman, who was quite famous at NYU for his sort of sloganeering way of teaching. But he'd always say, the kind of goal for your homework assignments, which were tremendously helpful in building my craft, were he wanted you to create images that were strange, lyrical, never before seen. As opposed to bad, boring, generic. Bad, boring, generic was what you did not want your images to be, but you wanted to find images that were strange, lyrical, never before seen. And that never before seen thing, I think. So I think this is a great analogy I've never thought of before, science and filmmaking.
And if you're a pure and careful scientist in that kind of data analysis stage, your internal thoughts and your expectations and hypotheses going in all the way from the beginning, all the way from experimental design, influence the kinds of questions you're allowed to ask in the data analysis. If you switch it up, if you start an experiment and things go differently than you thought they would, and then you switch in post-production and start to ask different questions about the world, you need to correct for that statistically. You actually have to embed and keep track of your subjective thoughts along the way about what you thought you were studying. Is there any analog to that in film and documentary or feature, in the sense that, like, I imagine there's a lot of kind of dynamic change along the way as the world unfolds in front of you, but do you hold on to is it a danger, is it a curse, or is it valuable to hold on to those initial kind of expectations and thoughts about what you thought this project was going to be?
It's a really good question.
Sometimes people include the filmmaker's narration as part of the journey, and something I've been actually experimenting with that with a couple of things I'm working on right now, including your own narrative, which is a nice, honest, it's an interesting way of doing things, and I'm kind of playing with it. Other times I think that documentary filmmakers, my colleagues, tend to be an incredibly hardworking, sincere, well-intentioned, thorough, just incredibly reputable bunch. But it's actually amazing what low standards we would be held to and what you could get away with if you wanted to, in terms of insincere, dishonest denial of that. You could be a very bad scientist as a documentary filmmaker, and perhaps there are some out there, or kind of conspiracy films and things like this that are very sort of bad actors. But for the most part, I think filmmakers hold themselves to tremendously high standards, despite actually being held to very little account. I think. I don't know if that answers that.
Okay, I think we had our first awkward silence, and we're almost an hour in.
We didn't even.
You probably have to go to work.
I do.
We
can
do work too.
We can do this tomorrow morning.
We should do more. I think. Yeah, I'm actually kind of disillusioned with I used to be very special to be the one documenting. I'm sure you remember this, like before the advent of everybody being a filmmaker and everyone having a camera and everyone documenting the world around themselves almost as a compulsion instead of as a way of interpreting in a positive way the world. We're all stuck on these phones, like saying, oh, let me take a picture of my food, let me take a picture of this, let me take a picture of that. And that's kind of actually pushed me away from documentary filmmaking and more towards three-dimensional creation of space. Do you have any thoughts on the fact that now everyone and their brother is
it's changed.
filming
That's right.
everything all the time? and it's kind of annoying? Or
Well, and there's an overload of content. There's more, and content now feels like, rather than growing up when these, these rare opportunities to see these great works, where even if it was, one of Warhol's, like a woman is crying, or you're looking at the Empire State Building, we'd create so much meaning around these things, or these films. You mentioned Eric Romer just now. Like, I'm like, oh my God, we used to, I walked around London, having seen a film, or Paris, and you'd spend a day with your friends discussing this latest, or just you visit to some kind of art house theater to catch up on your Eric Romer back catalog or something. We created so much meaning around it, and now we're saturated, and it feels like it's fighting for your attention rather than us fighting for these opportunities to make meaning and understand the world, and that. Yeah, I agree, and that's why I sort of want to hold lightly to the medium, and not hold firmly more to the mission of how to live rather than the actual medium, because the media keeps changing, right? And we're not making Elizabethan drama anymore, although Shakespeare did so well with that, for example, whatever. The world keeps unfolding and changing, and our relationship to what is meaningful does. And it is overwhelming that content just feels like it's we're in this fire hose of stuff, and we don't make meaning. When we don't make meaning around it, it stops being meaningful, right?
It used to be so special. I remember seeing a early Kieslowski movie where, like, he filmed this little old lady in Poland, and then she died, and then he's showing the footage to, like, the son, and he says, "Oh my God, you've made my mother immortal, and you've made her still alive even though she's dead." And this little grainy black and white image of her walking down this bleak little hill, and there was this reverence for the medium that just understandably isn't there anymore. I mean, and people are going back to, like, in a kind of nostalgic way, and shooting film again, and therefore kind of, but it seems a little bit forced to me. And anyway, I have this very conflicted relationship to it now, because I used to feel like it was just this magical, special thing. And then I got to be this magical, special guy for, like, being the one with the camera. Like, I used to be the only one in high school that would be taking pictures of everything, and I would, like, really enjoy going to develop them. And then I got, was the only one with a video camera. And now we've lost that in a way. And it's
I wonder as well, about whether we're burned out, whether we're getting old, whether the things have moved on and we've really got to just refresh ourselves and stop looking for, it's interesting when you think about Chris Nolan, who, I revere, but it's also, is he hanging on to things like people who are opera, you know what I mean? Like, we fund these operas, and it feels like a fantastic medium, and, obviously it's fantastic, but it's moribund. You have to prop it up with these government subsidies. It's not, it's rare that kids are, like, racing off to the opera, or maybe that's something we should, I don't know. It's very, I have these questions too. I wonder if I'm burned out. I wonder, I feel bad that I don't want to watch films all day, every day, and I find so many other things interesting. And I shouldn't feel bad. I feel that I've just moved on. I did that when I was young. That's what I did. I ran around Paris with my periscope and my gauloise, and I watched, having spent all day in a sound studio filming for my day job, I'd then go and watch 2 films a night and 3 films a day on weekends, and obsess about the craft and wanting to be a filmmaker. But now that I am, what's a good way to spend my time, and what do I find more interesting? This conversation, for example, is more interesting to me than watching a film.
I can't watch a movie anymore. Like, very rarely am I able to sit through a whole movie, and yet I can listen to a 3-hour-long podcast. So it's weird. Like, it doesn't seem as if it's a medium that anymore as I don't know, as like in touch with the pace of our age. And yet somehow these conversations are, which seems like counterintuitive, because we are in such an ADD time. We've talked about this a bit.
And sometimes films cut through. I mean, occasionally a film is I think also the industry is very creatively constipated. I think documentaries have been much more interesting and dynamic.
Yes.
In again, sort of I think you feel as a documentary filmmaker like you're a failed fiction filmmaker constantly. The industry makes you feel like that. And on some level, I am a failed fiction filmmaker because none of my fiction films have ever actually been made, despite actually being paid to try and having lots of films that looked like they were going to get made and stuff like this. Technically, I am sort of a failed fiction filmmaker on one level, but on another level, I have to say that the creativity and the opportunity and the craft and the creative, and it's been fantastic being a documentary filmmaker. I've loved it, and I still love it. It's incredible.
Yeah, I don't want to end on a note of disillusionment. I just think there's
no, it's
moments
to
of
us.
worry. Yeah.
I want to be honest about that though, and actually, I don't think we should be dishonest. I think we should be authentic and say we have this different relationship. But I don't know if it's burnout or overwhelm or stress or age or what it is. But I want to be authentic about the fact that it feels really different than it did in our youth, and maybe we'll find our creative edge in different places, and that's okay. We shouldn't feel bad about that, right?
That's a perfect way to end. And it's exactly 1 hour. Thank you, Lucy. Maybe we'll do this again. I think we could do another hour easily.
Oh yeah. See you tomorrow, everyone.
Bye.